We don't live in silos. We don't live inside the TV. We don't live only in the real world. We live everywhere. And there must be a way to connect an action that happens on one screen with an action that happens on another screen on the real world.
Ronny, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing data and measurement in media at the moment?
So I think the problem is today all measurement is a last click measurement. So this means that instead of measuring the entire journey of the user, we just see parts of this journey. And for example, if I go and I click on an online ad and get into a website, this website will say 100% of the attribution is because of this click. But what they don't see is all the interactions I had with the brand prior to clicking on this ad. For example, I may have seen several ads on TV, but they have no way to know it. Now, this leads to wrong decisions because what a lot of brands may say, okay, let's put all of our money online because this drives all of our traffic and stop TV. But when they do so, they find out that in effect, TV actually drove a lot of these online clicks, and suddenly the cost per click on the online side just grows and they get much less clicks than before. So any measurement solution must look at the entire journey and not just on the last click.
And I don't think there's one single challenge around it. I think there's a number of things that are happening in our world at the moment. One, we're being reduced to a world of numbers. So the more that you measure stuff, actually, the more you lose the real insight around the human, because people just start to look at the numbers, and that's a real threat to how you think about media experience and media planning properly. The other thing that's happening is there's this convergence. So, ViewersLogic do a great job in observed data, but so many agencies work with claim data like TGI and so on. And you've got this really interesting convergence coming to play where people are struggling to come away from their legacy way of thinking around claim data and observed data and bring the two things together into one single, approach with your clients' businesses. So that's the other one. And then I think the other one that you're seeing more and more articles about now is that what's measurable has actually driven the share of media spend over the last 10, 15 years. So digital is obviously dominated. Ronnie's talked about last click. And measurement actually, to a certain extent, has been to the detriment of the effectiveness of advertising, which seems really weird, but there's a whole piece here around that serendipity that comes from a lack of measurability and understanding the macro effects of an advertising campaign as opposed to concentrating on last click. So those things have all combined to create a real challenge in the world of media and advertising, where I think risk-taking is much less evident than it was, 10, 15 years ago. And we're almost actively being drowned by the numbers around us and losing our sense of logic.
Why do you think there's this, or in terms of the cause of those challenges of being drowned by the numbers, where do you think that comes from?
It's the immediate pressure that comes on businesses, and it's natural. When you're expending a huge amount of money of a client's budget, and a lot of the clients that we work with are first to market clients who are spending their first few £100,000 in a market. It's very precious to them, and they need to see the return on that almost immediately. All this sort of long-term effect and brand building stuff, that it's not something they necessarily buy into in the first instance. And so there's instantly that pressure on measurement to demonstrate the payback to then drive the scale that goes into the business. And too many businesses are looking at it in that way. And we all know Burnett and Field and all that lot talk about how important sustainable growth and brand growth is alongside short-term metrics. But at the moment, and I think it'll happen with the economy going the way it is, more and more pressure will go on the short-term stuff.
So I'll talk a bit more from the technical point side here. And the problem is that today, and actually for the last 100 years, media is measured in silos. Okay, so you will have one company looking at TV, another looking at online, a third looking at what happens in the real world, etc. But we don't live in silos. We don't live inside the TV. We don't live only in the real world. We live everywhere. And there must be a way to connect an action that happens on one screen with an action that happens on another screen, on the real world, etc. Now, the only way to do so is to completely change everything we believe about measurement. So instead of measuring in silos and then fusing the data together in order to get some probabilistic correlation between the things, what we suggest and what we have done is we said instead of measuring media, we will measure people. We will measure what the same person is watching on TV, doing online, buying in the real world. Once you can do this, you can immediately understand how it ties back into what Henry said about losing sight of the individual. And we are bringing the individual back to the center of the stage.
I think the other thing to add to that, Ronny, is that those silos are highly guilty of marking their own homework.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. We're now in a space where, you know, Netflix and Disney Plus are subscribers to Barb now, and how crazy it is that took so long to happen.
Even this is still keeping it in the same silo, because what Barb measures, it's very important for in order when you need a currency, but they measure reach and frequency. Reach and frequency, what does it tell you about the effectiveness of your campaign? It tells you nothing. So if I tell you that you had a campaign that reached 95% of the population who saw it 7 times, was it a success or not? It's the wrong question. If it worked and it convinced people to buy, it was a success. But if it convinced people not to buy or didn't work, it wasn't a success. So instead of looking at what you can measure, when you look at the same silo, you need to start looking in a broader way. And as I said, measure the individual across all silos, and then you can really understand behavior.
Talked about a lot of challenges and the state of measurement and data at the moment. What solutions do you guys see to these issues, and how can they be adopted? Henry, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Yeah, so look, I mean, obviously we're on the call here with ViewersLogic, who's one of the data partners that we use on the agency side of things. And where, you know, there is no holy grail. Let's be clear about that. You know, there's all these different attribution businesses that have all these different claims to fame, but they all work on fused data, or they all work on different algorithms that claim X or Y, but they're not as powerful as a single source panel such as ViewersLogic. And there's 3 ways in where it's incredibly powerful for an agency to have that type of panel. The first one is around we talked about understanding the human and the difference between claim and observed data. And I guess the best example I can give of that is that we have previously worked with ViewersLogic around erectile dysfunction products. And if you go into any claimed research data to identify those audiences, of course, no one's ever going to claim they've got that issue in their health. If you go into Ronny's data or ViewersLogic's data, we can source people who have read articles in relation to erectile dysfunction, searched about it, have potentially been engaged in social or whatever around it as well, and create an audience with that group. And that's what we call human first thinking, because you're not going to get that insight and understanding of that audience through multiple different sources. And with a single source data, I can then run a campaign, albeit a TV campaign, against that audience, and then directly understand the uplift of sales against the audience I've created on one source of data. Now that's incredibly powerful, and it doesn't work on every single category, but when you can do that not only in a digital world, which obviously that was with an online purchase mechanism, but now this platform works with shopper data. You know, we won a piece of business 2 weeks ago where we were able to explain to them how we would use this single source data to demonstrate TV exposure directly onto purchase of products in store through the Nielsen shopper data that the platform now ingests on the single source. So it's that type of stuff that actually I think is groundbreaking is probably an overstatement, but it just simplifies everything because we've got a single source of stuff. And it gives us the insight on the human piece and on the data at both ends in terms of planning and delivery, and then finally on the uplift into the client's business.
I think that the beauty of single source data is that it's almost endless on the questions that it can answer. So in many cases, we see something and then we can dive deeper into the data and answer more and more questions. So it can just go and cover more and more of the campaign. I'll give you an example. We just now added the ability to look again on a single source basis on the effect of price and promotion in store, in the supermarket, plus TV, how they can work together. Well, I can tell you it's 1 + 1 = 3. TV and price and promotion together is way more effective than any one of them separately. And the good thing is that we start seeing adoption from the market. So we just closed a big deal with Channel 4 that understood that our data can really help them prove the effectiveness of their channels. And we see more and more brands coming to us with different questions about the journey of their users. And luckily, our data can answer them. Henry's example about the erectile dysfunction, one of the things we found in our data, which was very surprising for us, is that while the brand thought that most of their clients are male 55 plus, what we saw is 1/3 of the clients were female that were actually searching because, while their partner was in denial, they understood that something is wrong and they went and they searched. Now, for such a brand to catch these people, to catch the female at that point, could save them so much money and could be so effective. By the way, they were also on average 10 years younger than the male people that searched there.
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Just before we wrap up here, is there one last thought that you might want to share with our audience of what do you think needs to change in measurement in media? Henry, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so it's the behavior of the human intelligence in the middle that needs to change. So integrated thinking between the claimed and observed data and the logic that sits in the middle of that, in the human brain, not the technology, not the platform, not the data, is what needs to change. Because too often I end up talking to tech providers, or even some of our team, who talk about the how and the what in terms of measurement, but not the why and the benefit and why it's important to the client and how it creates the story it needs to create. And that is a bit that's changing. So we all get caught up in the tech and the platform, the data, but it's the human at the heart of it, and the intuition and the risk taking I talked about at the beginning that needs to come from the clients as well is crucial. Because if we don't actually start to embrace that stuff, all we're going to do is end up continue to work at last click, short-term metrics, and see great businesses die on their feet because they haven't built proper sustainable growth through actually proper broader human thinking. And we're all guilty of that because we all get too caught up in the tech and the how and the what, not the why.
And the way we look at it, slightly from a more technical point of view, says that it's all about the issue of single source versus media that is measured in silos. And the thing is that historically, the way it worked, initially you had TV. So you had a company who measures TV. Then came online, so they started measuring online. Then came social, they started measuring social. And at a certain point, it became very hard to change anything because you had too many companies spend too much money on measuring things. And the only way is to just say, okay, we start completely from scratch. And to start completely from scratch says, as I said before, start measuring the person instead of the media.